Hi, it's Christy here. What I want to talk to you about today is quite similar to a topic I spoke to you about, I think it was on my last video, a week or two ago, where I was talking about, I've got some company here. Say hello, Ellie. There she is. Um, the last one I spoke to you about was the language we use around death, or more specifically, the language we use to try and avoid saying death, to say anything but death, and the problems that causes, and why you should think about doing something different. And there's another element to that too. It's not just the language we choose, but it's also the way we speak about death, the tone, the posture we hold when we speak about death. Um, and I'm thinking about this because over the last week I've been getting some new life insurance quotes. As any good hyper death aware mama to be will think about, is that, as soon as you find yourself with a baby on the way, your all of your obligations and responsibilities change, and part of that is that, were you to die, your obligations and responsibilities, and part of that being financial, change drastically as well. So I've been getting new quotes to get an appropriate policy to reflect that. It's not a morbid thing, it's just a practical thing. It's not my intention to die and leave my baby, but parents die. Parents die. They die sometimes when people are very, very old. They die when people are very, very young. Sometimes they die when people are babies. So it's just about being aware of that and being practical and realistic about it. So I was going through the process of getting a few quotes, and I got to speak to this really lovely broker. Really lovely woman, and she came on all bright and bubbly on the phone, and okay, so you're looking at life insurance. Okay, great. And where do you live? And how old are you? Do you smoke? Da 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 da. What were you thinking in terms of insurance, amounts? And I said, well, the reason I'm doing this is that, I'm pregnant, and, oh, congratulations, that's wonderful. Do you know what you're having? Da da da. Really lovely. And I said, well, that's, the reason why I'm looking at a new quote, because obviously I'm going to have a baby, and I want to make sure that if I were to die, that there is, adequate money to cover somebody else raising my baby. And sudden shift in her. Sudden shift in her. She'd been speaking to me like this, like a normal person, and she was quite bright and bubbly. And she automatically did the shift to, this lowered voice where she said, "Oh, I know it now. I know it's a terrible, terrible thing to have to think about, but have you thought about the amount?" And I said in my voice, my normal voice that I used to talk about everything, I said, well, no, it's not a terrible thing. It's just a practical thing. And yes, this is what I've thought about. And as the conversation went on, I continued talking in my normal voice, the one that I used to talk about everything. And she continued talking in her special voice, the one she used to talk about death. And at one point, I just wanted to say, lady, stop. What are you doing? Talk normally, please. Can you talk normally to me? Um, and that's what I want to cover about today. This tone and the head tilt. I put money on the fact, I couldn't see this woman over the phone, of course, but I put money on the fact that probably her head was tilted like this as she was having this terrible, terrible conversation with me. Now, often, I mean, a lot of people do this, and it's very unconscious now for most people. And much like the use of language around death, where we don't want to say dead or death or died, this is also a case where it's whole part of that package. It just feels like we do this in the name of sympathy and understanding. But actually, it's not about either of those things. What it is, it's about learned behavior, and it's about fear. Now, let me demonstrate what I'm talking about. Learned behavior, and that, well, obviously in this case, she may very specifically have been trained. Well, people are going to talk to you about life insurance, which means they're going to talk to you about passing away, and so you need to be very sensitive and understanding. But in terms of it being learned behavior, think of how kids talk about death. Think of how kids talk about it. One of my friends shared a lovely story with me a while ago, where she knew I would appreciate the story. Their family cat died, and they decided they were going to have their own little funeral ceremony and dig a little hole in the backyard and do that all as a family. And so they did that, and they took the opportunity to give each of their kids the chance to say something. And they got to their youngest, who little girl was 3 or 4 at the time, and her cat's name was Jelly, and she said, "Jelly, I'm sorry you died." And then she went on with her little speech. And my friend said, she had to stop from laughing because her daughter was speaking about death, but not in the way that adults do. Now, this is not because she didn't understand that the cat was dead and not coming back. It's not because she didn't understand, or she didn't have any feelings or any emotions about that. It's because no one had yet taught her that you don't use this voice to talk about death. Especially not at a funeral when somebody's died, you use this voice. She hasn't learned that yet. It's nothing to do with her understanding of death. It's everything to do with her understanding of how you are supposed to express yourself around death. What is appropriate? Over a grave, how are you supposed to speak? What tone are you supposed to use? Rather than what's authentic. And the other thing I said was, so we've got that it's learned behavior, but also that it's very fear-based. And it is because, people will sometimes argue, well, but it's, it is a very sensitive topic. It needs to be dealt with great understanding. There are crapload of things in this world. There are a crapload of things in this world that are really, really serious, that are, massively impact people's lives, that people are very emotive about, very passionate about, that are very far-reaching. And, if we're talking about things like war, if we're talking about things like child poverty and child abuse and terrorism and sex crime and all these things that can go on in our world. And, we don't feel the need to talk like this, If I talk in this voice with any of those things, it's not considered disrespectful. It's not considered that I'm not being understanding or I'm not being sympathetic to people who are impacted or affected by those situations in some way. But this is our special voice we use for death. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there working around death, unfortunately, who will use this voice. I know, when I work with clients, I work with them head on. I work with them with the same head, the same angle of head, the same voice that I'm talking to you now. And it's really, really, really important to think about how you talk about death unconsciously. So like last time, you've thought about the language that you use. You've thought about, can you just say dead, died, die, death, dead? Or do you have to find some other language? Can you just talk about death like this? And that's the thing. It's not, again, as I said last time, it's not about, to talk in this voice is not unsympathetic or not about not being understanding. It's not that you're being brash or really brutal in the way that you're speaking. It's just that you don't feel the need to diminish yourself, which is precisely what happens when that woman felt like doing this. It is like just shrinking yourself a little bit, just making yourself a little bit less assertive, a little bit less there, turning the volume down just a bit. And there's no need. If you want to be understanding, you want to be sympathetic, then you be loving and you be present. Okay, don't go tilting your head. Don't go turning down the volume on yourself, because all you're doing is adding into your own fear of death. You're just playing into that. You're adding into the fear of death around you. You're adding into the fear of death of society. So if those things don't bother you, if you don't care that you're afraid of death or others are afraid of death or that our society at large is afraid of death, if you don't want to feel different about death, if you're stuck in grief and you're perfectly happy, you want to stay there, then don't question. You, by all means, keep on doing what you're doing. Keep tilting your head. Keep using the same language. But if you want something different for yourself or for society, one or the other or both, if you want to be able to feel differently about death than you do now, if you want other people to be able to, if you want to be able to feel your grief to be a different experience, if you want death to be a different experience, then think about this. It is really important. Think about this as you would a person. If you have a person in your life, you can't say their name and you can't look at them straight on and you can't deal with them directly, and you have to talk to them like this. how are you ever going to change the relationship or come to terms with them? You need to be able to look them in the eye with your head up. You need to be able to speak as you speak to everyone else to be able to start to change things there. Okay, so really, really, really important. Take this away. I would encourage you, I would beg you to take this away and have a think about. Don't worry about what everyone else is putting out in the world. You can't necessarily affect that. You don't want to run around tapping everyone on the shoulder, but just what you're putting out. Just what you're putting out into your own field, into the field around you, into society in terms of how you speak about death, the words you use, the way you speak about it. Please have a think about that for me. So, by all means, if you want to, share this around, put your thoughts below. Otherwise, I will see you again very soon. Much love.